He started with $8, not 8,000, not a loan, not an inheritance, just $8 saved from backbreaking hay work under a punishing Texas sun. That small decision, a boy choosing a guitar over immediate survival, would eventually reshape American entertainment, build a media empire, and create a fortune so vast that even decades after his death, people are still asking the same haunting question: where did it all go? Because the real mystery of this story isn't how he became rich. It's what happened when there was no one left to inherit it. The world would later know him as a cowboy icon, a singing legend, a businessman, and one of the wealthiest entertainers in history. But none of that was visible in the beginning. His childhood wasn't filled with opportunity. It was filled with uncertainty, constant moves, failed ventures, a father chasing deals that rarely succeeded, a mother weakened by illness, and a household where survival came before dreams. Hardship shaped him early. By the time most children were discovering hobbies, he was already working. Farm labor before sunrise, small jobs for pennies. Every coin mattered. Every day tested endurance. But somewhere inside that struggle, music became more than entertainment. It became escape. It became identity. When he ordered that guitar from a catalog, he wasn't investing in a career. He was investing in hope. And hope slowly turned into opportunity. Singing in small cafes, playing at school events, performing anywhere people would listen. Those modest beginnings built confidence. Confidence led to radio. Radio led to recordings. Recordings led to fame. Then came the transformation. The humble boy who once worked rail jobs to support his family became the voice of a generation. His songs carried optimism during economic hardship. His cowboy image symbolized stability when the world felt unstable. Hollywood embraced him. Audiences adored him. And success multiplied rapidly. But what truly separated him from other stars wasn't just fame. It was foresight. While many entertainers spent freely, he invested carefully. Land, television stations, radio networks, hotels, oil interests, and perhaps most surprisingly, professional sports. He became the owner of a baseball team, something few entertainers ever achieved. His wealth expanded beyond music and movies into a diversified empire that quietly grew year after year. By the time he reached the peak of his career, he wasn't just a performer. He was a businessman operating across multiple industries. Every deal added another layer to his fortune. Every acquisition expanded his influence. And unlike many celebrities, he maintained discipline. He built slowly, strategically, patiently. Yet, behind that success, his personal life remained surprisingly simple. His first marriage lasted decades. There were no children, no direct heirs. When his wife passed away, it marked the end of a long chapter. Then came his second marriage, one that drew attention due to the significant age difference. 34 years separated them. Hollywood whispered. Critics speculated. But he remained private, focused, and composed. Time moved forward. His empire remained strong. His investments continued generating wealth. And as he aged, one reality became unavoidable. The fortune would outlive him. When he died at 91, the numbers were staggering. Real estate holdings across multiple states, media properties, business partnerships, valuable intellectual property, ownership stakes in sports and entertainment. The total value was almost unimaginable for someone who began with $8. But there was no traditional family structure to absorb it, no children to divide the estate, no obvious heirs waiting in the wings. Just a carefully constructed legacy and a complicated question. Where would it go? The answer wasn't immediate. Legal processes unfolded. Foundations were considered. Beneficiaries examined. And slowly, the distribution began shaping itself into something unexpected. Instead of a simple inheritance, much of the wealth flowed into institutions, charitable causes, and long-term preservation of his legacy. Museums were funded. Educational programs supported, cultural preservation initiatives strengthened. His name became attached not only to entertainment history, but to philanthropy and public benefit. It was as if the fortune returned to the audience that helped create it. But the story didn't end there. Years later, analysts and historians began tracing the impact. Properties still generating revenue, rights still producing income, investment continuing to grow. The estate didn't just distribute wealth, It created an ongoing financial ecosystem. Decades after his death, the ripple effect remained active. This is what makes his story unique. Many fortunes fade, many estates shrink, but his was structured to endure, to evolve, to continue influencing industries long after the original owner was gone. The boy who saved $8 didn't just build wealth, he built permanence. And perhaps that's the most remarkable part. He didn't come from privilege. He didn't inherit opportunity. He carved a path through persistence, talent, and discipline. He transformed hardship into motivation. And when the time came, his fortune didn't vanish into private hands. It became part of a broader legacy. Today, when people revisit his life, they often focus on the numbers, the businesses, the empire, but the deeper story lies in the journey. A journey from tenant farms to national fame, from rail depots to Hollywood, from a catalog guitar to a cultural icon. And in the end, the mystery of where the money went becomes less important than what it represents. It represents resilience. It represents vision. It represents the idea that even the smallest beginning can grow into something extraordinary. Because long after the songs faded and the cameras stopped rolling, the legacy continued, quietly, steadily, influencing lives, supporting institutions, and reminding the world that sometimes the greatest wealth isn't just measured in dollars, but in the lasting impact left behind. Before the world ever knew his name, before the spotlight, before the wealth, there was just a boy standing in dust and heat, holding a second-hand dream. $8 had bought him a guitar, but it had also bought him a direction, a fragile thread leading out of hardship. No one around him could have predicted what that decision would eventually create. Not a career, not a brand, but an empire so vast that decades after his passing, people still examine it piece by piece, trying to understand how one life could accumulate so much and what happens when that life ends without heirs. The early years hardened him. Poverty wasn't temporary, it was constant. Every move between Texas and Oklahoma felt like starting over. Every failed business venture by his father deepened the uncertainty. His mother's illness added a quiet sadness to the household. Stability seemed always just out of reach. But in those moments of instability, he developed traits that would later define him: discipline, persistence, and a careful relationship with money. Music opened doors slowly. First local gatherings, then radio appearances, then recordings. Fame didn't arrive overnight. It built gradually, step by step, as audiences connected with the sincerity in his voice. During difficult economic times, his songs offered reassurance. They weren't just entertainment, they were emotional anchors. That connection translated into enormous popularity, and with popularity came opportunity. Hollywood saw potential in his image. The singing cowboy, the dependable hero, a figure representing optimism. Film roles followed, and each appearance expanded his reach. Merchandise, tours, broadcasts. The brand grew organically, supported by public trust. But unlike many stars swept up in fame, he remained cautious. He understood instability too well to waste success. He invested, carefully, quietly, consistently. Land became one of his earliest strategies. Real estate offered permanence. While others spent lavishly, he acquired properties that appreciated over time. Then came broadcasting. Television and radio stations created recurring income streams. These weren't glamorous purchases, but they were powerful. They turned earnings into infrastructure. The expansion didn't stop there. Hotels, production companies, oil interests. Each move diversified his portfolio. Then came the unexpected, ownership of a professional baseball team. It surprised many observers, yet it fit his long-term thinking. Sports franchises carried cultural influence and increasing value. Decades later, that decision would be seen as visionary. By the time he reached the later years of his career, his wealth extended far beyond entertainment. He wasn't just performing. He was managing an ecosystem. Businesses feeding other businesses. Investments reinforcing each other. Revenue continuing even when he stepped away from the spotlight. But while his professional life expanded, his personal life remained relatively quiet. His first marriage lasted for decades, built on stability rather than spectacle. There were no children, no family line preparing to inherit the growing fortune. When his wife passed away, it marked a deeply personal loss, but also introduced uncertainty about the future of his estate. His second marriage attracted attention. The age difference sparked curiosity. Hollywood speculated, yet he remained private, focusing on his work and legacy. As the years passed, one fact became increasingly clear. The fortune would eventually need a destination beyond traditional inheritance. When he died at 91, the scale of his estate stunned observers. Real estate holdings across multiple regions, media companies, licensing rights, sports ownership, business partnerships, royalties. The value stretched into extraordinary territory, yet there were no direct heirs waiting to divide it. This is where the story becomes more complex. Instead of a simple distribution, the estate evolved into a carefully structured legacy. Charitable foundations, cultural institutions, museums preserving Western heritage, educational initiatives funded by his wealth. The money didn't disappear. It transformed into influence. Properties continued generating income. Media rights continued producing royalties. Investments continued growing. Decades later, analysts realized that his financial planning had created something rare, a self-sustaining legacy. Not just a fortune, but a system designed to endure. The boy who once counted pennies had built permanence. And perhaps the most remarkable part is how quietly it happened. There were no dramatic announcements, no grand declarations, just disciplined decisions repeated over decades. Save, invest, diversify, preserve. These habits, born from hardship, shaped an empire. Today, his name still appears in discussions about entertainment history, business strategy, and philanthropy. Museums carry his influence. Cultural preservation projects reflect his support. Sports franchises connected to his investments continue thriving. The ripple effect remains active long after his passing. The mystery people once asked, where did the fortune go, gradually transformed into a different realization. It didn't vanish. It expanded outward. It became part of institutions, communities, and industries. It became legacy rather than inheritance. And in that transformation lies a deeper meaning of his story. He began with almost nothing. He built through persistence. He protected through discipline. And he left behind more than wealth. He left behind continuity. Because sometimes the greatest measure of success isn't how much someone owns, but how long their impact lasts. And in his case, that impact continues quietly, steadily, shaping the world long after the final curtain fell, a reminder that even the smallest beginning can echo across generations. Long before the wealth, long before the titles, long before his name appeared in lights, he was simply a boy trying to survive circumstances that offered no guarantees. Dusty roads, borrowed land, and the constant uncertainty of whether tomorrow will be easier than today. That was the environment that shaped him. Nothing about his early life hinted at the magnitude of what would follow. Yet those hardships planted the discipline that later defined every decision he made. When success finally arrived, it did not erase his past. It guided his future. He remembered what instability felt like. He remembered watching opportunities disappear. And because of that, he treated fame not as a reward, but as a responsibility. Each paycheck became a seed. Each investment became protection against the unpredictability he had known so well. As his career expanded across radio, film, and live performances, he quietly shifted from entertainer to strategist. He began seeing industries not just as platforms for creativity, but as structures for long-term growth. Broadcasting stations offered recurring income. Real estate offered appreciation. Licensing rights offered longevity. These weren't flashy decisions, but they were powerful ones. The public saw the cowboy hero. Behind the scenes, a businessman was assembling a network of assets that would eventually span entertainment, sports, media, and property. His acquisitions were deliberate. He avoided unnecessary risks. He reinvested earnings. He built steadily, avoiding the financial collapses that ended many celebrity fortunes. One of the most fascinating aspects of his life is how little attention he gave to displaying wealth. There were no extravagant headlines about reckless spending. No scandals about financial mismanagement. Instead, he maintained composed, almost modest presence. This restraint allowed his fortune to grow quietly, year after year, until its true scale became visible only near the end of his life. By then, the numbers were staggering. Properties across multiple regions. Broadcasting influence reaching millions. sports ownership that tied his name to American culture in a new way, royalties from songs and film continuing to generate income. It was a diversified empire built not on sudden luck, but on decades of careful planning. Yet the personal side of his story remained strikingly simple. 2 marriages, no children, no direct heirs waiting to inherit the empire. As time passed, the question of succession became unavoidable. A fortune of that size could not simply fade away. It required structure, planning, purpose. When he passed away, the distribution of his wealth reflected the same discipline that built it. Foundations received support. Cultural institutions benefited. Project preserving Western heritage found funding. Educational initiatives gained resources. Instead of concentrating wealth within a family line, it spread into public influence. Years later, observers realized something remarkable. The estate had not only distributed wealth, it had preserved momentum. Investments continued producing revenue. Properties maintained value. Licensing agreements extended his influence. The legacy functioned almost like a living entity, evolving long after its creator was gone. This is why his story continues to captivate people, not just because he became rich, but because he transformed wealth into endurance. He turned temporary success into permanent impact. The boy who once saved $8 created something that still resonates decades later. His journey also reflects a broader truth. Great fortunes often begin with simple choices repeated consistently. Work hard, save carefully, invest wisely, think long-term. These principles sound ordinary, but applied over a lifetime, they create extraordinary results. He didn't rely on sudden breakthroughs alone. He relied on persistence. Today, when historians look back, they see more than a performer. They see a blueprint for sustainable success, a figure who balanced creativity with financial discipline, someone who understood that fame can fade, but smart decisions endure. His wealth became more than numbers. It became influence, culture, and opportunity for others. And perhaps that is the most powerful ending. A life that began in hardship did not just escape poverty. It created stability for generations beyond itself. A career that started with music ended with a legacy that reached education, sports, and culture. A fortune that could have disappeared instead became a continuing force. The story reminds us that beginnings do not define endings, that discipline can outlast fame, and that sometimes the quietest decisions, saving $8, buying a guitar, investing in land, can shape a future far beyond imagination. Even now, long after he is gone, the echo of those decisions remains, in institutions, in cultural memory, in the ongoing value of the empire he built. Proof that one determined life, shaped by hardship and guided by patience, can leave behind something larger than wealth, a legacy that continues to grow long after the final chapter closes.